Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on Deep Dive with Covenants, Scoping Reviews Q&A, where we are going to hopefully help you find out how to plan and deliver an effective scoping review. My name is Nancy Owens, and I'm going to be moderating today's session, and I'm joined by my fellow session presenters, Geeta Iskandarani, who is a Covenants Community Manager based in the UK, Delindia Green-Laughlin, a Covenants Community Manager based in the US, Laura Meller, a Community Manager who's based in the UK, and Benita Olivier, a Professor in Musculoskeletal Physiotherapy who's based in South Africa. And the three main presenters for today's session are going to be Benita, Laura, and Geeta. And as I mentioned, Benita is a personal professor in musculoskeletal physiotherapy at the Physiotherapy Department of the University of the Witwatersrand and director of the Wits Cricket Research Hub for Science, Medicine, and Rehabilitation. Her research focuses on reducing sports injuries with a particular interest in human movement analysis. And Benita is also the founder of the Research Mastermind Success Academy, a membership that supports postgraduate students to achieve their goals. Laura is one of Covenants' community managers, and she comes to us with a background in academic publishing. She supported the editorial team of the Cochrane Handbook, and she also writes for the Covenants blog in addition to supporting our global user community. And Geeta is a community manager, also at Covenants, with a background in nursing and experience in evidence-based healthcare research. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. All webinar attendees are automatically muted as we're running this presentation in standard webinar mode. You can enter questions at any time in the questions box that appears on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will integrate those questions into the presentation as relevant to the topics that we'll be presenting. Also, just a note that for video tutorials and helpful articles that are available at any time, you can visit the Covenants knowledge base at support.covenants.org. We will be recording this session, and it will be available on our knowledge base after the fact, along with the slides from this presentation, and as well as you as attendees will also be sent a link to the presentation. So just a little bit of background information about Covenants for anyone who's not familiar with it before we get started. Covenants is a cloud-based online platform that supports review production for various types of reviews. It has been designed by researchers for researchers in order to support efficient collaboration for teams involved in producing evidence research, regardless of location or affiliation. Covenants is a not-for-profit mission-driven organization, and our mission is to create tools to make reviewing faster, easier, and more enjoyable, and to enable teams wherever they are to use efficient processes and good practice to produce high quality evidence. And you can see on this timeline the specific parts of the reviewing process that are supported by the Covenants platform, as well as some statistics about our global user community. So before we kick off with the first question, I'd like to take a poll of our attendees and get a little bit more information from you about your knowledge, your level of knowledge or comfort about doing scoping reviews coming into this session. And we're going to ask you a follow-up at the end to see how you're feeling at that point. So I'm going to launch that now, and if you can tell us what your comfort or knowledge level is about this topic coming into this session. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to see the results now, and it looks as though more than 50% of the people who are joining us today have been involved with at least one scoping review. Another 30 or so percent had not been involved with a scoping review before, and a small percentage have been involved with 3 or more scoping reviews. Okay, so, and back to the slide deck. And so with that in mind, we will now move to the first question, which we're going to hand over to Benita to answer. And the first question is, what is a scoping review? So over to you, Benita.
So welcome everyone. So it's very important to really know what a scoping review is, and that's why I'm glad that we are starting with this very important question. Now, luckily, we as researchers, or me, myself, didn't invent this definition. It was put together through there was consensus that was reached between experts in systematic and scoping reviews. The JBI Scoping Reviews Methodology Group worked together to reach consensus and to devise a definition. So I would definitely suggest that whenever you are doing a scoping review, this is the first place that you're going to start, by reading this article from Mann et al. What are scoping reviews? Providing a formal definition of scoping reviews as a type of evidence synthesis. So that's just the best starting point. Now, let me give you the definition, which was the actual question. Scoping reviews are a type of evidence synthesis that aims to systematically identify and map the breadth of the evidence available on a particular topic, field, a concept, an issue, and often irrespective of source. So it may be primary research or reviews or non-empirical evidence. And it also goes within and across particular context. Now, scoping reviews can clarify concepts or definitions in the literature and identify key characteristics or factors related to a concept, including those related to methodological research. Now, often if we just look at a definition, it does become a bit hard to grasp what does it actually mean. But a scoping review is really aims to determine the scope or the coverage of a body of literature on a specific topic, and in that way give clear indication of the volume of literature and studies available out there. So it's quite broad. And then scoping reviews are often useful for examining emerging evidence when it is still unclear of what other more specific questions can be posed in a specific field. And the outcomes of a scoping review is very valuable because it may be addressed by precise systematic reviews. So scoping reviews are often used to see what research have been done out there, and then to determine what systematic reviews can be generated or conducted based on the findings of a scoping review. Now, there's certain indications, and this is now another reference that I would definitely recommend, also from the same JBI Scoping Review Methodology Group, Mann et al. And this one was published in 2018. The title of this paper, and it's a reference that you'll find on the Scoverdance knowledge base afterwards. Systematic review or scoping review, guidance for authors when choosing between a systematic or scoping review approach. And they define the indications and the purposes for conducting a scoping review quite well. To identify the types of available evidence in a given field, to clarify concepts or definitions in the literature, to examine how research is conducted on a certain topic or field, to identify key characteristics or factors related to a concept as a precursor to a systematic review, and to identify and analyze knowledge gaps. So if I have to give you an example of a scoping review objective, you'll see how broad it is. And when Laura later on answers the question on the difference between a scoping review and a systematic review, you're going to see that how this review objective is different from that of a systematic review. So, for example, a scoping review that we published a year or two ago was on the objective of this scoping review was to map research in the use of digital technologies in occupational therapy and physiotherapy education, in terms of the type of digital technology used, how digital technology is applied, and the author-reported outcomes. So you can see it's gathering the literature and the studies out there and mapping them out. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Benita. We do not yet have any follow-up questions submitted relevant to this topic, so we will then move on to the next question, and that is going to be answered by Laura. So the question 2 is, what's the difference between scoping reviews and other types of reviews, including systematic reviews, mapping reviews, literature reviews, etc.? So Laura, over to you.
Thanks. So the table on this slide gives an overview of the differences. Essentially, everything stems from the research question. Systematic reviews ask a specific question about the effect of an intervention, whereas scoping reviews will have a broader question. So it could be something like, what do we already know about the health of adolescents in detention? And because of that different approach, that different type of question, of course, the objectives will also be different from the more kind of typical systematic review objective. So an example of a systematic review objective could be something, again, very specific. So we're going to evaluate the effectiveness of exercise intervention versus no intervention or alternate intervention to prevent shoulder injuries in athletes. It's super specific, whereas the scoping reviews question is much, much broader. What scoping reviews and systematic reviews have in common is a pre-specified eligibility criteria. Each of them search the literature in a systematic way. Each screens the results and selects the evidence for inclusion. Those things are done in a very similar way between the two types of review. The data extraction stage for a scoping review is done slightly differently, and it's referred to as charting for scoping reviews. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. There tends to be no quality assessment or risk of bias stage in a scoping review, and that's really because you are collecting data rather than attempting a sort of critical appraisal of it. So it's because of that different approach and the different sort of type of data that you're most likely to have in a scoping review, it's unlikely to call for the QA stage. Now, the other column in this table that we haven't talked about so far is the literature review, or sometimes called narrative reviews. Of course, they can be done systematically, but here in this table, we're really referring to a piece of work that is deliberately selective and doesn't make any attempt to control for bias. So that's really the main difference between literature review and the other two types. The question's also got mapping reviews in it. They're sometimes called evidence gap maps, and that's something completely different again. So I always think of that as a type of infographic. It's a visual representation. They're often interactive, and they show the study data quite specifically, as well as any gaps. Funding bodies use these to see exactly where to focus spend on research. And Nancy, if you just go to the next slide, we've got an example of each type. Thank you. So you've got a systematic review there. First up, that's a really famous one from Cochrane. And then beneath that, an example of a scoping review. And then the last one is the evidence gap map, which you can follow that link and see what I mean by the cool interactive visual that you get with that one. So yeah, just wanted to finish off this question with a few resources for your further reading, which are listed there. And sorry about the background noise. We're in an open plan office, so I hope everybody got all that. Back to you, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Laura. No follow-up questions as yet on question 2 either, so we will move along to the next question. Geeta's going to be telling us more about developing a protocol for a scoping review. So Geeta.
Thank you, Nancy. So the protocol for a scoping review is similar to that of a systematic review. It briefly defines the objectives. There's also methods as well, and reporting to provide transparency. But the PRISMA has developed actually a scoping review checklist, which is very useful in ensuring that your protocol contains the essential elements needed for a scoping review. And also just note that scoping reviews cannot currently be registered with Prospero, but there are other number of options available. As you can see, there's Figshare, Web of Science, and Open Science Framework. Just the next slide, Nancy. Yeah, so here you can see as well, there's a nice example of how to develop and more of guidance on developing a protocol for a scoping review. Also, on the next slide as well, Nancy, thank you. There's going to be as well templates that are set up already by the JBI summary from about how to develop and more of a detailed protocol template that you can fill in with your information relevant to your research question and your scoping review project. And again, the Prisma and a few other things from the Johannes Briggs Institute system. Yeah.
Thank you. And we actually do have a follow-up question on this, which was about if there's any information you can provide on how to register protocols in Web of Science. So I don't know, that may not be feasible to answer in this format, but
yeah. So the link I provided for the Web of Science that we provided actually on the slide, on the previous slide on the Web of Science, there's definitely more on that webofknowledge.com there's more information on how to proceed with that. I've never used it as well myself, but I had few more input on the Open Science Framework one. But for the Web of Science, we recently actually I knew that from the more guidance from the Prisma resource. When I went through these resources from Prisma, this is where I was able to know that the Web of Science has one of these resources, but probably from the actual website we will have more information. So maybe probably there more guidance for that, and probably the JBI and the Prisma are very good places to start with as well, for setting up the protocol. And then once probably they will have more information about the registration itself, and then probably more information on the Web of Science as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Example is really good as well, and Nancy, yeah, thank you for reposting it. This is really also a good example and more guidance, and there's more information on how to set up the protocol as well. Yeah, thanks, Nancy.
Yep. So next up is question 4. How do you develop and manage the search and know when to stop? And we're going to hand over to Benita for that topic.
So I would say do a 3-step search strategy as described by by JBI. So the JBI Manual for Evidence Synthesis have got a scoping review chapter, and they describe the search strategy quite well. So the 3-step search strategy works that you, in this way, you do your initial search first. That's where you just search for the keywords that you are aware of at the moment. Let's say you're looking for digital technologies in physiotherapy and occupational education. You'll use those keywords and loosely search 2 or 3 of the databases. Now, the aim of this initial search is to find more search terms. Now, as you find more and more articles, you're going to look at the titles of these articles. You're going to look at the abstracts, the keywords described in the articles, and then you're going to get more keywords. I mean, we've been in many of the scoping and systematic reviews that we've done before, we've been really surprised that that there's so many synonyms for the same thing, things and words that we don't use, for example, in our country, but it's used in other countries. And that's why this initial search is very important. You do an initial search and you see if you can find as many as possible synonyms for the search that you want to put together. And then you get to step 2, and that's where you put your formal search strategy together. And this is where it works very well if you put it in table format, and you can use the PCC concept, population concept context. I have a video on the Research Masterminds YouTube channel under the Systematic Reviews playlist on how to put together your search strategy. Because it's really something, all the platforms and the databases work differently. So you have to have, one table or a place where you just show you or present how you are going to use your search and the various terms and how you'll connect it with your Boolean operators, and where you'll use subject headings, because those also differ between the various databases. And then we always recommend, if you have an expert that you can get on board, a librarian, that's definitely a much needed and of great help. And then the next step is you've done your 2-step search strategy is to go and search your databases. We usually use between 8 and 10 databases because that's what we have access to. that has been sufficient in the past. You will get some duplicates between these databases, and you're just going to remove your duplicates as the same as what you would have done for when you do a systematic review. And then the third step is, once you've found your articles and you've decided which full text to include, you're going to look at the reference lists of these articles and see if you can find some more studies that can be included. So that's your 3-step search strategy. Now, the best way to know when you are done with this search is to go through the process. That's why you develop a protocol beforehand. You define what search terms you're going to use, you expand on those search terms, you decide which databases you're going to include, and then once you're through the process, you know that it's time to stop. And then you can start with the next step, which is the review of title and abstracts. But I must say, we've seen many published scoping reviews. Some do scoping reviews with less databases, 6 or 5. I would definitely recommend to include as many relevant databases as you have access to as possible. And for us, it worked in the past to include 8 to 10 databases. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you. And we do have a follow-up question on this topic, which is there a good general range of numbers of papers to review? Our last search strategy returned thousands and took the reviewers a very long time to do the title/abstract review.
This is such a relevant question. So we are involved in quite a few reviews because I'm also supervising many postgraduate students. And I think this is the most common question that we get is how many articles am I supposed to find? Is 5,000 a lot? Is 1,000 a lot? And I wish I had a simple answer, because the scoping review is so broad and because all these different sources are included, there's no proper guidance that I can give to say that, listen, if you get more than 5,000 or more than 2,000 or 1,000, it's time to reconsider. I would say that if you get thousands, like say 21,000, or that's what one of my PhD students got for one of her searches a few years ago, and we were shocked. And I mean, she was adamant she's going to work through them, but I mean that would have taken years. So what we then did is we revised her search strategy to see what's happening here. Why is it including so many papers? And then we were able to narrow the search strategy, or just define it a bit better, so that the search didn't end up with so many papers. But I wish I had a magic answer for that one. It's just that there's not. But going back to the drawing board, I think that's the magic answer.
Great, thank you very much. And just as we scroll to the next question, you can see an example here of an article dealing with that subject, as well as some additional resources. And then we will move on to question 5, which is how to manage the scoping review screening process effectively. And I'm going to hand over to Geeta to answer that question.
Thank you. So this is where Covidence starts to add value. So software such as Covidence starts to make this process quicker and easier for you. Covidence supports a specific segment of the systematic review process or scoping reviews process. A lot of the things that librarians do to support review teams usually happen outside of Covidence. So for example, setting up the team, setting up the review questions, running the search strategy. It's once you have the set of potential relevant studies and ready to get that when Covidence, this is when Covidence comes in. So in Covidence as well, you can set up the team settings for the management of the review, up to monitoring of the team contributions, then from importing your citations and screening your citations. So I will just now, Nancy, if you can just go into like a demo review that we are a member of, and I can just briefly show you and have an overview, give an overview of how that looks like in Covidence. Thank you.
Yes. So we've now switched over to the Covidence platform, and I'm going to go into one of our demo reviews.
Yeah,
and,
thank you.
Yeah, in title and abstract screening, yes.
Yes, so this is, oh, actually, yeah, sorry, can we go back to the first page? So this This is like a quick overview of the first page once you enter a review in Covidence. This is how it looks like. It's called the review summary page. And this is, again, this is a part of the review that is already in progress. But when you set up a new review, this is what you'll see is a standard review project framework, which is automatically generated when you create a new review in Covidence. Now, going through this major section, some of them, mainly the settings page. So if we just can go to the settings page, thank you. So the setting page will allows for the management, for the team to manage actually the review, meaning then from, like you can see from the review settings page, you can set the title, put your search strategy, and also then decide and select how the review is going to function, meaning how many reviewers are required to screen. The default screening in Covidence is dual screening. That's for both title and abstract and full text review screening. This means we require 2 reviewers to cast a vote on it for a reference to move into the next stage of the review. You can also, from the settings page, you can include your inclusion/exclusion criteria and from your protocol from that page. And similarly, you can add from this page your exclusion reasons and your highlighting, your keywords to highlight your inclusion/exclusion as well. It will help you with the screening. Also, you can add your tags from the tag section, and finally with the team settings, this is where you allocate the tasks and monitor the team contribution. So you can see the overall and the individual contribution of screening and everything that the team is working on from the screening section, title, abstract, and this is similar to the full text screening. So then going back, now we can go back to the actual title screening, going back to the main dashboard. Then this is when the first stage of after you've set up your settings and after you've obtained your citations and you finalize your protocol and you of course, and you obtain your citation after designing your search strategy, then you need to import them into Covidence. So you can then click on the import button here, and this is where you can import your citation. So Covidence currently supports 3 formats for file imports: and Note.xml, PubMed text format, and RIS text format. And here you can select the category, which is a stage or the step of the review process that the references will appear in. So if you're starting from the beginning of the review and you have not done any screening outside of Covidence, then you can select screen, and this will import all your citations to the title and abstract screening section. And then you can choose a locally saved file from your computer and then click import. So once your citations are imported into Covidence, then we can start the first stage of screening, which in it's title and abstract screening. So going into just showing you how it looks. So this is, at this point, you're going to make the decision based on title and abstract, and whether this is going to be relevant, be included based on your inclusion/exclusion criteria. So you can either click no and maybe and yes. And then once you've clicked any relevant button, the reference will disappear from your screening list. And this is, of course, if you're in dual screening again, then this means then there should be another co-reviewer who is going to cast the second vote as well for you. Also, actually, that made me remind me that I had to mention as well from the settings page, you can also decide on one or dual screening, meaning you can also switch to one reviewer mode, which means you can screen, only one person can do that, and click on one of these buttons, and then this makes the reference to move. This will move the reference to the next stage directly without any second vote. So, and as you can see, everything, a few of the features that we've seen and we've set up, and the settings page, you will be able to see here. You're going to be able to show or hide your criteria from inclusion or exclusion, and will help you in the screening. Also, you can show and hide your highlights and many other things like tagging, etc. And then finally, after then you finish your title and abstract, then you've probably decided to include these references with voting them as a yes or a maybe, then these references will move to the next stage, which is the full text screening stage. And this is only if you decided to include them into the next stage. And really, like, this is also a screening stage where the main few differences here, you're going to have 2 buttons, include, exclude, instead of 3, and you'll be prompted to actually present a reason for excluding the study and choosing that from the list here. And again, this can be edited from here or the settings as well, where I showed you. And again, this is where you also can import the PDFs for your references to perform the full text screening. And we have a similar features similar to the title abstract, from showing or hiding criteria, showing and hiding highlights for keywords, and many other, from the tagging options and many other options that we have similar to the title and abstract screening. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. And I'm just going to go back to the slide deck and let's take a look and see if we have any follow-up questions that are relevant to this one. So there is one follow-up question about if there is a way in Covidence to export just a set of references that have been tagged.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, this is not really, like, you can't filter and export them directly, but what we can do is when you actually export your references from the exports section in Covidence as a CSV, this will export the tags and notes along in a separate column, and this is where you can filter these ones and probably pick the ones with the set of references that has been tagged with a specific tag. So this is the only way that we can do this in Covidence at the moment. So the list will, just to clarify, so the list will might include the ones with tags or without, but you can filter these from the Excel, from the CSV that we can open in Excel.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question is, what's the best way to manage data extraction? And we're going to hand over to Laura to tell us more about that.
Thanks. The starting point for designing a data extraction form is the review question itself, and if you have one, the research plan or the review protocol. So the form has got to be something that's well structured and easy to use. Designing a good data extraction form does take some practice. It's not something that you're likely to get right the first time. So we really recommend pilot testing your form and your templates in Covidence. If you're going to use Covidence, I'll show you that in a second. So you take a small number of studies and check that the form that you've designed is capturing everything that you need. From there, you'll go on to extract your data. We'll look at that next, and to check it. And then finally, you can export it out of Covidence as a CSV file so that you can continue any subsequent analysis or further work that you want to do on your data. So we recommend the Covidence Extraction 2.0 tool for scoping reviews, and that's because it's flexible and fully customizable. It's also the default extraction tool, so you don't need to do anything to set that up. When you start a new review, it will automatically be using Extraction 2. Extraction 2's got options for extraction to be done either by a single reviewer or by a pair of reviewers. So you also have the option there, and you know, the one that you choose will really depend on, again, what you've set out in your plan. So this is an example of the data extraction view in Covidence. You've got the full text PDF on the left and the form on the right. If you want to make changes to the form, for example, you're going through a study extracting data and you find that there's an additional outcome that you hadn't actually listed in your template, then you can make more edits once the extraction is underway. And that's absolutely fine. You can go to your review template, as I say, and make edits to it. You can save them as a draft, and then you can publish them. So the form that the rest of your review team will see is the latest published version of the template. So until you hit publish with your new edits, the rest of your team will see the previous version. So that's how that's all managed and taken care of, again, for you in Covidence. So just in terms of data extraction template for a scoping review, you might decide, for example, that you want to set up a list in your data extraction template of coding labels, and then use those to tag your studies as you extract data. But as I say, the form is fully customizable and can really be set up to extract and record whatever you need for your project. And I think if we just go to the next slide, Nancy, there's a little bit of further reading and information and some tips and that sort of thing as well.
Okay, I don't think we have received any follow-up questions as yet specific to this topic, so we can move on to question 7. And we have had some follow-up questions submitted that we will be dealing with at the end for anyone who submitted a question and we haven't gotten to it yet. We will be doing more Q&A at the end of the running through these questions. So question 7 is, what are some strategies for managing the process and the team effectively? And we're going to hand over to Benita for that topic.
Oh, so this specific question really lies close to my heart because it's at the core of, a core determining factor of the success of any research project. So I'm going to move a bit away of Covidence and maybe even scoping reviews specifically, and just answer this question in a general sense. So the very first thing that is very important is that to have proper and well-developed project management skills. Now, who's the project manager? Now, most often, if you're doing this study for postgraduate purposes, it will be the student that's the project manager. If it is a research study for non-degree purposes, it is most often the principal investigator. But some projects where there's large teams involved, the principal investigator may be different from the project manager. But just like when you build a house and there's somebody that needs to coordinate when the window panes are going to be delivered, when the next phase is going to be built, and all the different moving parts needs to sit together. In the same way, a research project has got many moving parts, and somebody has to coordinate and make sure that a certain timelines are reached, that the quality is good, that the expectations are communicated clearly. And I would definitely say that whoever is in charge of the project, whether it's the student or the principal investigator, that to really make an effort, draw up a table that states what are the roles of each of the members of this team. It's easy if you only have 2 people involved, but as soon as, and you've seen many scoping reviews and systematic reviews have got multiple co-authors, somebody needs to draw up roles and responsibility for each one of them. And then to communicate these roles clearly to whoever's involved. So I'm not a fan of hidden expectations. I do believe that we should address the elephant in the room, even if it's uncomfortable. So those conversations need to take place at the beginning of this project, whether this is a scoping review or any other research project. And then the project manager will also check in regularly, keep the whole team up to date as to where you are in the process, in the phases, what the next timeline is. And specifically for a scoping review and a systematic review that I found worked very well is to set up certain meetings in certain phases of the scoping or systematic review. And that creates accountability. For example, let's say the team will meet during the conceptualization phase because everybody needs to be on the same page as to, what is the scoping review is going to be about? Where will its limits be? How big will it be? How focused will it be? What will the research question be of this specific scoping review? And then I'd say you can divide the task of developing the protocol. And maybe there's some reading up to do in the different phases, but the team needs to get together again somewhere during the protocol development stage, again, to get everybody on the same page. And then I'd say that somewhere before you do your comprehensive search, you need to get together again. Now, if there's one person that will be responsible for putting a search together, and then you set up a meeting, say in 2 weeks' time, and let's say for the 2nd of June, today is the 18th of May, and you set a date for the 2nd of June, you communicate clearly that the person responsible for developing the comprehensive search strategy needs to be ready and to present it to the rest of the co-authors, or to the 1 or 2 people that's maybe part of the search strategy that will assist with that. In that way, you have deadlines for specific phases. You have accountability, because nobody wants to pitch up at a meeting with a red face and not having done the homework allocated to them. And then the same principle can be used for before you review all the titles and the abstracts, or before you review the full texts for inclusion, or when it's time to extract the data in a table. And if you communicate the expectations of each of the role players clearly, you set these meetings up, and in today's day and age, it's so easy. You jump on a call together and you sort things out quickly. You have your accountability, and the expectations are communicated clearly. Everyone pitch up at that meeting, and if all goes well, you'll walk away with what is the next step. Okay, this is the next deadline. This is what we're going to do. This person will present at this meeting. Everybody will give their feedback, and then you move on. Now, obviously, in between all these stages and pit stops, there will be some email reviewing that can take place, and that's perfectly fine as well. But these check-in meetings, I'm not a fan of unnecessary meetings, but these check-in meetings help very much. So a while ago, I wrote a blog post for Covidence on engaging with your supervisor to support your systematic review. Now, many of the principles of project management have been explained in that specific blog post. So I would encourage you, if you're doing a review of whatever type, go and read that blog post. I think it's containing quite a few valuable tips and tricks that we've learned over the years. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Benita. And I will just mention that we will update that link is not currently in the slide deck, but we will add that to, and anything that came up in the discussion that isn't in the slide deck yet, we will provide an updated version of the slide deck with all of the key links that were discussed in today's session before we make that publicly available, so it will be possible to access all of those. Okay, so next topic is also back to you, Benita, is what happens after data extraction, making sense of the data. Is meta-analysis required? What are some guidance about writing up process and findings for completing scoping reviews?
Yeah, also a very relevant question. So yes, what happens now? You've extracted the data, you've got out of all these many studies what you need, and what now? So with a systematic review, it would have been to start entering and conducting a meta-analysis, in other words, to pool all the research findings or the statistics into one bigger statistical analysis. But with scoping reviews, that's not what we are aiming for. And so in the case of scoping reviews, you have to decide how you're going to present this data through a map or a chart. But my best tip for that would be that you first go back to why are you conducting this scoping review. So if it is just to look at the breadth of the evidence available out there on the topic in terms of a field or a concept or an issue, irrespective of the source, then you are going to, linked to that original objective, you're going to decide what are you going to get out of it. So it really depends on your research question in terms of how you're going to analyze it thematically. So firstly, go back and look at your original research question. In the case of our example, where we looked at the digital technologies in occupational and physiotherapy education, our aim was to, and it was also stated in our objectives, that we wanted to categorize all the data into 3 categories. We wanted to look at the type of technologies, the application of the technologies, and the author-reported outcomes. So then you'll look at all these data that you've extracted from the different sources, and you're going to start categorizing the information into your categories, depending on what your aims and objectives were. Then under these categories, we, in this specific example, looked at various themes. For example, under the category of the application of these digital technologies, one of our themes were that some technologies were used to foster professional behavior. And another theme was that these technologies were used to develop communities of learning. And in that way, we furthermore divided this data from the scoping review into various themes. Now, many of you will be familiar with the software that we often use for qualitative research, and that's the software that really works well when it comes to scoping reviews as well, like NVivo or MaxQDA, and there's a few others out there as well. And this is where I'll definitely advise you to look into these software and look at ways that you can apply and use this software to develop your categories and your themes. Now, the one thing that I really would like to warn you here, because you're going to sit with a lot of data and a lot of studies, because it's a scoping review, the aim for it is to be broad, you may go down a rabbit hole. And if you feel overwhelmed, where you just realize that, listen, there is so many categories, I don't even know where to stop. It feels like you are going to summarize every single thing on this earth. Go back to your original plan. And even if you go back to your original plan and you're still uncertain, go back to your team and just brainstorm again. What was the aim of this scoping review? Because you're going to sit with all those many resources, and it's often difficult to find your way out of that rabbit hole. So overwhelm is very common. Go for a walk, go drink some tea, and then go back to your original plan and work from there. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the questions, pre-submitted questions. We've got about just under 10 minutes left before the end of the session. We have a couple of follow-up questions that have already been submitted, and people are free to continue submitting questions. I'll just note there are a couple of resources at the end of this section that will also be available after the fact. We did have some specific questions about Prisma, and so there are some resources relevant to that. So as we move into questions, general questions and follow-up questions, we just wanted to share. This is specific, it specifically mentions systematic reviews, but we still think it's relevant because we feel like scoping reviews have their own challenges that make them, can often make them just as complex of a process. So we felt like this really, we've shared this before with our community, it really resonated with our community, we shared it before, so we thought it was relevant, continued to be relevant. So, and we have, I think we have time for this one question, maybe two. We have two currently. So should systematic reviews or meta-analyses be included in your scoping review, or should you pull the articles that they used instead? I don't know who wants to take a first pass at them. Anita?
So we recently had so in the JBI manual for scoping reviews, it states that one of the sources or for a scoping review are reviews. So I would say, now I haven't got an answer from the literature. That's my answer comes from my experience. And if I think of a scoping review in, for example, digital technologies, and I find a systematic review where they did an effectiveness systematic review, let's say, where they compared digital online learning with face-to-face learning. I would rather take all the primary studies from that specific systematic review and include that. However, if I find a narrative review, I would definitely look through the reference list and look at the primary studies that may be relevant. But it is possible that specific narrative reviews can be included in this in your scoping review. So I think it's a bit something that we need to just explore a bit further. So reviews can be included. It's a good source to include in a scoping review, but there may be indications where it's better to go back to the original source. I mean, if you want to state what type of evidence is out there. And you want to state that for this topic, so many reviews have been done, people are collating research in certain ways. I mean, that will definitely be an indication to say that include that review as is. But when you include a review and not the primary studies, you are going to lose out on valuable information from that primary studies, because not all the information from the primary studies features in the systematic review. So yes, very good question, and we come across that problem every now and again.
Okay, that's great. We're just about at time. I am just going to launch our last poll. And if you could let us know if you feel more knowledgeable and or confident about this topic than you did at the beginning, please be frank with us. We've given you a couple of different options, and let us know how you're feeling about that. That's running now. And while that's running, I will just mention that, again, this recording will be sent directly to you. We will post the slide deck. We'll update it with any resources that got discussed during this session, so that it will be complete. And we will share that information once we posted it on the Covenants knowledge base. If you do have any additional questions or are stuck on something, please do feel free to contact us at support@covenants.org if you're not finding the information you need on the knowledge base, or you're just trying to work through a problem, and we'll be happy to try to help you work through that. So I am going to go ahead and close the poll now, and you should all be able to see. And thank you very much. That's a very positive response. That the majority of people are feeling ready to take the next step. If you don't fall into that category, and you can mull over what's been covered, and if you do have follow-up questions, don't hesitate to come back to us. So I am now going to wrap up this session with thanks to all of our presenters, Benita, Gita, Laura, and Delindia. I'm also going to say thank you to the participants and everyone who registered and submitted questions, since that was how we built the content for this session. And thank you all very much for your time today. And I hope that you have a good rest of whatever part of your day is still available. Thank you very much, everyone.